Welcome back. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the Senate map and doling out who's going to win these races based solely on how the average of the polls are at this point in time. And we're going to get those polling averages over at Real Clear Politics, which is a great resource if you're looking for polling data. But on top of that, also going to be doing a little bit of a discussion and an analysis on these races as well. But still, it's going to be solely based on the polling results, how we fill out this map. So the Democrats sitting at 42 seats, Republicans 47. So that gives the Democrats 19 pretty safe seats, and then the Republicans 5 safe seats. And those 11 seats that are in the middle are looking to be some of the more competitive matchups. The Democrats obviously having way more seats that they have to defend this election cycle than the Republicans, which is why it's so skewed right now in terms of how many seats they already have on the board. So those 11 competitive matchups going to start out east and then work our way west. So the first state we're going to look at is New Jersey. And the Democrats, they probably don't want to admit it, but this is a much more competitive race than they would have figured otherwise. This is almost like the Democrats' version of Texas, where they have the incumbency advantage, but it's kind of almost working against them because the incumbent doesn't have the greatest favorability numbers, kind of like over with the Republicans in Texas with Ted Cruz, who doesn't have the greatest favorable numbers, and that race is also very close in what's a typical red state. New Jersey, obviously, typically a blue state. So those polls recently for Menendez have not been looking all that great, almost about right around the margin of error. Things are being skewed a bit here by that 21-point lead he had in the polls back in April. But again, more recently, they have been much closer in nature. And the Democrats, they shouldn't avoid this race at all. They need to put in the resources to hold on, even in New Jersey, and what's likely to be a better year for Democratic turnout in general, still to overcome having an unfavorable incumbent. Probably going to need to put some kind of resource into that one just to make sure that they hold on. But still, Menendez ahead in the polls consistently, even though it's by a slim margin. So we give the state of New Jersey over to the Democrats based on that average polling result. Now moving on over to West Virginia. Joe Manchin. Everyone thought he was an extremely vulnerable Democrat coming into these 2018 midterms, but over the last year or so, the polling data has been really positive for him in general. Also, in terms of the primary results, he was able to do really well in that situation. He got more votes himself than what the Republicans were able to do between their top 3 candidates. So a guy that has the incumbency advantage. Also, he doesn't have the unfavorable situation that Menendez has over in New Jersey, which is also a positive for him in this situation. And again, his average here at about 8.4 percentage points. At this point, it would be somewhat of a surprise, certainly, if the Democrats weren't able to keep West Virginia with the incumbent Joe Manchin. Moving on over to our next state here, Florida. This became much more difficult once Rick Scott decided he was going to run for this Senate seat on the Republican side. Bill Nelson, not the most enthusiastic campaigner by any means, and looking like it was going to be a really tough race for him. We see that these polls very close. Scott slightly ahead. The saving grace potentially, though, for Nelson in this one is the fact that Gillum is on the ticket for the Democrats, which is going to have a lot of enthusiasm and boost turnout amongst voters that probably wouldn't have come out to the polls otherwise just to cast a ballot for somebody like a Bill Nelson. So he could ride Gillum's coattails to this election victory. We'll see how that plays out. But again, we're solely looking at the polling results here, and Scott overall having a very, very slight lead here in the state of Florida. So we're giving that one over to the Republicans. Now moving on to the next race. Over in Tennessee, one of the more fascinating races. There are actually a number of very interesting ones, but here you have an extremely popular former governor on the Democrat side, and fortunately for him, he doesn't have to run against an incumbent. He's being challenged here by Republican Marsha Blackburn. And Bredesen, you can see the recent polls here. He's just slightly ahead, but if you go back further in this matchup, he's consistently been slightly ahead of Blackburn. You do see that. More recently, she was ahead in that Gravis poll, but then the most recent poll in NBC News has Bredesen ahead. Expecting a very close race here, but Bredesen currently ahead in terms of the polling average, so giving that one over to the Democrats in what would be a pickup for them in the state of Tennessee. Now moving on over to the state of Indiana, Braun versus Donnelly, and a long time ago I made a prediction video for this race, And this was back when the only major polling result we had was from Gravis, and that had Braun ahead by 1 point. I thought that was a great sign for the Republicans. The fact that they were already leading, and that was without the same kind of name recognition that you get from the incumbent Donnelly. But it has looked like Donnelly's been able to pick up some ground here more recently. A Republican poll from Trafalgar Group had Donnelly ahead by 12 points. NBC News, the most recent poll, had Donnelly ahead by 6 points. That is tremendously positive news for the Democrats in this particular race. And Donnelly, with that average of 5.7 percentage points here as an average amongst those polls. So that one is going to be kept in the Democrats' corner for the time being, with incumbent Joe Donnelly ahead with that polling average. So the next state we're going to be looking at here, if I can update the page. All right, so that's going to be Missouri here with Holly versus McCaskill. Much tougher election for McCaskill this time around than what she had in her prior election 6 years ago when she was going against Todd Akin. Holly, a much more competent campaigner and a guy that certainly has a better chance here against McCaskill. You can see in the polls tied amongst the last two polls, and then Holly, in that Republican poll from Remington Research, he was ahead by 2 points. So the fact that the decider here in this average is a Republican poll is a little bit gratuitous for the Republicans, but still at the end of the day, we're only going by that average, so we're going to be giving this to Holly. The NBC News poll that came out just recently has this one at a tie, but before I dole this one out, obviously, if you're the Democrats and you're in an extremely close race that's basically in a tie situation, you should probably feel pretty good because, in general, the data that we've been seeing, there's been an enthusiasm gap in the positive for the Democrats compared to the Republicans. So if you're in a close race as a Democrat, you should probably feel somewhat okay about that. But again, we'll see how that plays out in the state of Missouri, where the polls are extremely close. But again, only going by those polling results, Holly had the slight lead because of the boost from that Republican poll. So now we're going to move on to the next state, up in North Dakota. Again, extremely close here. Not a whole lot of polling data to go off of, and it's a little bit outdated at this point. I wish we were able to get some more recent polls here in the state of North Dakota. Heitkamp was ahead originally, Cramer ahead more recently. I'd probably still give this one as a slight lead to the Republicans, even though they are going against an incumbent on the Democrat side. But that slight polling lead here is going to have us fill the state of North Dakota out for the Republicans, which puts them up to 50 seats right now, and that would be enough to get them the majority in the Senate, because this little red VP down here is Mike Pence, who's able to break any ties that we have in the Senate. So the next state that we're going to look at here is over in the state of Texas. And again, the polls have been extremely close recently. We look back here, 1, 4, 6, and 2, and then 9 points. If you go a little bit further back, Cruz in average ahead by about 4 or so points. A lot of these within the margin of error. And again, like I said, basically a flip situation of what the Democrats are dealing with in New Jersey are what the Republicans are having to deal with in Texas. The first Senate prediction video I made way back, I think it was 3 or 4 months ago at this point. I think it was 4 months ago. I picked Beto O'Rourke to win this one, even though he was kind of significantly down in the polls, because I based it on the unfavorables for Ted Cruz and the fact that Beto O'Rourke didn't have a fraction of the name recognition that Cruz had, and it was already respectable in the polls. I felt like he was going to be able to close the gap, also because his favorability numbers are more on the positive side in comparison to Cruz, so I thought he'd be able to close that gap. Also, he's fundraised extremely well with those small dollar donations, and with all that being the case, he's getting his name out there, and things are getting extremely close with still a couple of months to go, a little less than a couple of months before those midterms. Can't wait to see how this one plays out, but again, Cruz is ahead in that average, so that one also going over to the Republicans. The next race that we have here is out in the state of Montana. And Tester, not a ton of polling data to go off of here. We have a Republican poll from Remington Research that has Tester ahead, and also Gravis has Tester ahead as well. Tester has good favorable numbers out there in the state of Montana, and even though in general this has been a Republican state, specifically in presidential elections, they have shown that they can elect Democrats to statewide elections as well. So with that average looking pretty good for Tester at this point, going to be giving this one over to the Democrats. And just a couple states left here, so going out to Arizona and Sinema. We've seen a ton of polls in hypothetical matchups between her and the three challengers that were on the Republican side. The one that she had the closest results with was McSally, and McSally going on to win that Republican primary is a positive sign for the Republicans, the fact that they were able to avoid having Arpaio or Ward go against Sinema, which would have probably been significant blowouts, but McSally likely to keep this one competitive again. In average, though, Sinema ahead in the polling numbers, and Sinema also having the advantage of not having to go against an incumbent. If this was Jeff Flake, it would be a much tougher seat for the Democrats to grab in the state of Arizona, more than likely. But right here, with that polling average ahead for Sinema, we're going to be giving that one over to the Democrats, and just one more state left to go, and this is an extremely close one out here in Nevada. You can see the polls here very close. Heller ahead by 1 point in two of the polls, and Rosen ahead by 4 points in one of the polls. One of the positives for Rosen in this one is if we look back at the primary results, she picked up a little over 10,000 more votes for the Democrats on her side and her ticket in comparison to the incumbent Dean Heller, who was also basically both of those races. Both candidates knew that they were going to win, running against challengers that didn't have much of a chance. But again, more turnout on the Democrat side, which is a positive for them in any primary situation where the Democrats have more primary voters than the Republicans. It's a positive sign. Also, Hillary Clinton able to win the state of Nevada in 2016, which is a positive sign in what wasn't a great year overall for the Democrats in 2016. Even Hillary Clinton was able to beat Donald Trump in Nevada. This is looking like a situation where Rosen has a great shot at flipping this one and getting it over the incumbent Dean Heller. But again, going to be very close. Can't wait to see how that one plays out. Rosen slightly ahead in terms of the average of the poll, so giving that one to the Democrats. So finishing up this video, that puts us at 51 for the Republicans, 49 for the Democrats, again, based solely on the polling data. As we head closer towards these midterm elections, we're going to get more polling data, so I'll probably come out with another one of these polling average videos, and I might even cut out some of the outlier polling results from, half a year ago or 4 or 5 months ago that might not be quite as relevant, but we'll see how that plays out in the coming months. Thanks, guys, for stopping on in for this video. Subscribe for more, and I hope to see you back here for more election prediction and coverage videos in the future.